And I believe success comes down to what I call 3D focus. And 3D focus stands for discipline, decisiveness, and deliberate. So those are the three capacities that somebody has to have. They have to be decisive, they have to be deliberate, and most importantly, out of the three, is they have to be disciplined. And I find that people that have had a fair amount of success, they share these attributes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Thrive and Achieve with your host, Dr. Matt Markle. Thrive and Achieve is the only podcast where professionals help professionals to succeed in career and wealth. Now, here's your host, Dr. Matt Markle.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Thrive and Achieve, where professionals help professionals thrive in their career and achieve financial success. Today, I am super excited to welcome my friend, Boris Blum. Boris is the perfect combination of business and investor expertise. He has over 25 years of experience working with successful entrepreneurs, ultra high net worth individuals and families, and high performing leadership teams. He's everything you'd want in someone of his expertise. He's an entrepreneur, he's a turnaround expert, he's an investor, and he brings extensive in the trenches experience in wealth management and asset protection, business management, succession planning, and personal performance optimization for high performers. Boris, welcome to Thrive and Achieve.
Thank you, Matt. I am so excited to be here and chat with you and looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. Okay, let's get started. Tell me a little bit about your professional journey. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I've always been sort of a serial entrepreneur. Early on in my life, I started out with Mickey Mouse little businesses selling candy bars when I was a kid and so forth. So I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. But as life takes its own course, I built a couple companies and I was mildly successful at the time, expenses, and not really sure long term what I was going to do. And a friend of mine introduced me to the insurance business of all things, which then got me interested in the use of insurance and how it was valuable. So I started a career with New York Life, and that was the genesis of my financial career. It got me on a path of thinking that maybe there was more that I could do in the world and help people with their finances and learn a new trade. And it wasn't as much about my entrepreneurial experiences. What I came to find out from that journey over a couple of years as I got into that business was that I actually did not enjoy working for a company. I had really gone very quickly from just being a licensed insurance agent to a financial expert. And I'd gotten almost every designation under the sun that existed. I got my master's in finance. I mean, I did a lot in just a few years. And I got attracted by a multinational organization to come join their operation and run distribution in Southern California. And I did that for a couple of years and realized that that is not what I enjoy doing. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I don't enjoy the corporate route. So for me, I was too much outside of the box and needed to go back to my entrepreneurial roots. And that's what I did. But I wanted to stay in the financial services space. I really enjoyed that industry. And I found that was kind of my calling at the time. So I started a number of ventures that related to financial services. I started an insurance brokerage company. I started a registered investment advisory firm, a property management organization, a number of these financially related businesses that would all help my ideal client. I've always worked with one kind of a profile, and it's always been the successful entrepreneur. I was never attracted really to anybody other than that because I felt like I could relate. That was kind of my background is this entrepreneurial space. So that's what I did. And it just kind of blew up on me. The success was great and I was really doing well with my career. But I got to a stage where I had to kind of revisit whether that was my calling long term, because I got disenchanted with financial services as an industry. It was all about transactions. It was all about, what are you selling to the clients, obviously. And whether that was insurance or investments or other financial tools, it didn't really matter. And I had come to the realization that the industry was built around product sales and not around solving problems. And I'm a problem solver at heart. I wanted to help clients solve their financial issues. And my clients were fairly high net worth and they could pretty much get access to almost any products they wanted. They didn't need me for the product access. They worked with me because of the wisdom I brought to the relationship. So I felt like I was a little bit shackled as a financial advisor in that space. and I needed to make a decision and move on. 2008 brought me a gift. The unfortunate part was it wasn't a gift for most of the people around me. My clients actually did quite well because they had assets. They were wealthy individuals, and so they did okay. But a lot of people did not. Their 401ks became 201ks, and they really struggled through that time period. But the gift that it gave to me was the fact that this is an opportunity for me to get out of that space and kind of rebuild my career in a different direction. I was not enjoying what I was doing very much. And a very successful client of mine was, around and said, "Hey, maybe you want to get out of that industry and maybe you want to come work with me." And I got the opportunity to be the CEO of a family office. And I chose to do that. And I left the financial services industry, gave up all my years of licensing and experiences to work with one very high net worth individual. And I absolutely fell in love with the work. The work was not an issue, but I had to make another important decision early on. And that was about, I would say, 2 years into the relationship, because I had envisioned a certain, role that I was going to be playing in this individual's life. And it turned out to be quite different than what I expected. I enjoyed the work, like I said, but I did not want to be the wet nurse to three adult dysfunctional children mine. And that's what it kind of became. So I, fortunately enough, had enough financial success in business acumen that I didn't need this in my life and I wanted to move on. And so that's exactly what I did. But I wasn't sure what the path forward looked like because unfortunately I'd kind of cut ties with the financial services industry and I didn't want to go back to that. And a friend of mine who was involved in turnarounds for companies. He was quite a successful entrepreneur, but he was a lawyer by trade, and said to me, "Hey, you got to look at this business. I've got more clients than I can shake a stick at, and I'd love to get you involved and give you access to some of these clients, and you can help them out. I think you'd do well." And so that is what I did. I changed my direction of my career, went down the path of trying to be a turnaround expert for companies, and absolutely fell in love with what I was doing. I love solving problems and I love working with successful entrepreneurs. These were people that had a vast amount of success somehow in their company. They had grown it to a particular level and something has happened. Something derailed their situation. And the challenge of solving that problem and working with them hand in hand to kind of save jobs and save the business was something I was really passionate about. And so that's what I did. I became a turnaround expert and a business strategist and really enjoyed doing that. That was kind of my professional pursuit during the day. And my side job was running my own wealth and investing portfolio that I had experienced from, the prior 15 years or so of working with high net worth individuals. So I had these two hats that I ran. I did a consulting practice on the one hand and investing on the other. And I absolutely love what I did. And that's what I've been doing.
That's awesome. That is very much in the model of being an anti-preneur. Despite your entrepreneurial desires and so forth, the concept behind being an entrepreneur is you have the job that you love during the day, but you also have to manage your uh, the equivalent of your family office or your family fund or your finances. Just the all different ways of saying exactly the same thing. And I want to talk about some of the finance stuff here in just a second, but as someone who's been in corporate America and run companies and seen things running well, seen things running not so well, and having to do turnarounds myself, I feel a kindred spirit there. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions on that. So when you think about the CEOs you're typically working with or the LTs, the leadership teams, what are the common patterns you see that kind of separate those from the winners, those that adapt, that those continue to be successful from those that stall? They may have had some success before, but they get tripped up and they can't make it out of that. What are the patterns you see typically?
Well, I think it depends on from which perspective we're looking at. If we're looking at the individual contributors, whether it's the CEO, people on the leadership team, or how they function as an organization, I think that question looks different depending on which perspective you're talking about. So let me touch on both of them for you. With regards to the individual's perspective, I have developed a thought process around this. And I believe success comes down to what I call 3D focus. And 3D focus stands for discipline, decisiveness, and deliberate. So those are the three capacities that somebody has to have. They have to be decisive, they have to be deliberate, and most importantly, out of the three, is they have to be disciplined. And I find that people that have had a fair amount of success, they share these attributes. These are things that come natural to them. But there are other people in the world that, in my view, have what I call a 2D focus. Okay. And these are individuals that don't see the world in the same way. And generally, if you think about it, there's two words that come to mind that make up this 2D focus, right? These are individuals that are either distracted or what I call delusional. You may think that's a funny label for it. But distracted, everybody seems to understand, right? We've got a lot of things coming at us as individuals every single day, but most of us are just juggling them and they find a way to like get rid of the new shiny object that shows up every day that gets in their way and they plow through it with a little bit of grit. But um, this whole idea of being delusional, I think, is problematic for a lot of people. And because nobody wants to admit that they're being delusional. It's the fact is that they don't see the world as it is. They see the world as they want it to be. And that can be very, very problematic because it's an external focus, not an internal focus. So people that have this 2D focus, I find, have a very difficult time contributing value in organizations. They have a difficult time being in a leadership role. And so I try to identify, individuals that have that focus as opposed to 3D focus, because at the end of the day, the most successful people I've ever met in my life, if I had to put a label on them, and I don't mean this in the literal sense, these are people that are dangerous. See, 3D focus leads to being a dangerous individual, and that's actually a good thing. These are people that are extremely disciplined in how they operate every single day. They're very clear about the decisions that they're making, and more importantly, why they're making those decisions. I think, from a success perspective, if you can be a dangerous individual under that context, I think you're going to be wildly successful. So I look for people that share those attributes. So that's from what I would consider the personal perspective on this.
I love that. The disciplined, decisive, and deliberate. Those are all attributes that we think of when we think of powerful, strong, effective leaders. On the 2D, the distracted and delusional, the distracted, clearly those who succumb to that are going to limit their productivity. I've done several recordings and in my book I talk about working on the things that move the needle, focusing on the things that move the needle, and trying to cut out the distractions. But the delusional, you'll hear people that talk about the CEO needs to be thinking aspirationally. They need to be just describing the will be state as opposed to the as is state. And how do you reconcile that with the concept of, like, well, too much of that is delusional, perhaps not enough of that is just thinking too linearly? How do you, because you've clearly figured out how to thread the needle on that. How do you do that?
Yeah. So, okay. So let me go a little deeper on this concept. I think a lot of people just show up every day and do what they do without much thought about it. When I talk about someone being delusional, it's because every one of us has a bias. Our life's experiences give us a bias. Our knowledge and wisdom in certain areas gives us a bias. So it's natural for us to apply that bias to what we do on a day-to-day basis. And that can be very problematic because although we think that our bias is correct, it could be completely off the mark. Startup founders will always tell you that whatever idea they came up with originally, it never turned out that way. Like the business went in a completely different direction. And if it took off, it took off, but they made some critical pivots along the way. We'll get to the business side in a second, but on an individual basis, I think what happens is most of these individuals, they don't have a filter in life of what they say no to. In fact, they say yes to almost everything that comes at them. And that's problematic. It's very problematic if you are a delusional individual. If you've got all of these biases from before that are clouding your process of evaluating opportunities, evaluating risks that show up. So in my life, I decided long ago, I learned from a very wise individual that you need to have standard and you need to have a filter, in essence, of how you live your life. For me, I call them guiding operating principles. In fact, I have a document that I created that I live my life by. And in that document, I articulate things like the principles that I believe that are important in discerning opportunities. I list in there very specifically things about what I want to work on: my health, my relationships, my business. And I'm very particular to identify not only a goal, but what actually shows up as success? How am I going to measure? What are the metrics that I'm going to measure to know that I'm heading in the right direction? That this is something I'm truly passionate about and going after, right? And so this document, I revisit it probably about quarterly. It's something that's a living and breathing thing. It's not an exercise that I did. And so by having this document available to me, I always have guardrails around what it is that I'm working on, where I'm spending my time. Am I spending time on what I call value creation, or am I spending time on opportunity maximization? Where is my focus? And those are the two things that I'm always balancing. And I found that early on, this was very challenging. I tend to be a very optimistic person. So I want to say yes to things. I want to accept all kinds of opportunities that come my way. This was difficult to implement. And I had to be very thoughtful about it. So I came up with a tool. I call it the productivity planner. It was my way of managing time and focus. And it is my tool that helps me implement these guiding operating principles. So the principles become my filter for what I say yes and no to. And I find that successful individuals use something like this. They use something that guides their focus, guides their decision making, and makes them dangerous in essence. And so that's how I do it.
I have you've shared that the guiding operating principles document with some of us in the past, and for those listening, I have read it, and it is truly a testament to Boris's desire to live intentionally. And it's so well thought out. It is if you want a guide to how to make the most of every minute in your life, and I'm not saying you can't have fun. I'm not saying you can't enjoy things and so forth, because those are in there as well, but it's about being intentional. And when I read that, I didn't know you very well at the time, and I was like, this is really. I don't think I've actually even told you the story, but I was like, this is super solid. This guy, he knows his stuff, because I do very similar things myself, that I try to map out what I'm working on, so to figure out what moves the needle. I develop a set of frameworks so that one decision makes 1,000. So I've talked publicly in the past about I don't consume sugar anymore. When the dessert tray comes, I don't have to be thinking about it like, well, maybe I worked out pretty hard today. Maybe I could have some pecan pie because it's really good and it's this the season. Nope. I made a decision within. I don't have to think about it anymore. And it's actually it is freeing. It takes the stress away from you, because you just basically look at, okay, do I eat sugar? Nope, I don't eat sugar. Okay, well, I'm gonna pass on that.
No, that's great. I think that every successful individual I've ever met, this is how they operate. At the core, whatever tool they use something to help guide them along their journey in life. And what was very interesting to me, a couple of years back, I was doing interviews I did a radio tour basically of different radio stations, Fox, Rick Valdez, a bunch of shows all over the country. And I was talking about this concept of 3D focus. And I decided to try something out as a test. I put together an event, an online virtual event. It was a challenge event to invite people on those shows to say, hey, if you're interested in this topic of personal productivity and you want to get better at life, whether it's financial or business or whatever the reasons you might have, join the challenge, hop on and be a part of this. No cost, no obligation, nothing to sell. There's no offer at the end. This was purely a test to see what people would do. I put this out there to, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on these shows that listened to them. And we had a number of people that signed up. And what was so interesting to me was, out of the hundreds of people that actually sent in emails, because the requirement was just simply send an email and say, I'm in, and we'll sign you up for the event. A handful, literally a handful of people actually went through the steps to go and be a part of the challenge. And nobody even showed up at the end. Like, we had people that we had invited privately. And so we had the event happen and it was a great success. But the people from the shows that we invited, that it was a completely free offer. They took the time to write the email to say I'm in, and then never did anything. So I think the vast majority of people out there are just living their life, doing their thing. And all of these things are just noise. They're not signal. You need to find the signal that matters to you in life. And you can't find it if you don't know what frequency you're looking for. So the GOP for me, guiding operating principles, brings it all together and says, this is what matters to you. Therefore, everything else needs to go because you only have so much time in a day.
And on this planet.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll answer the other part of the question, which I think you brought up around how does this affect teams and organizations and all of that. What I found when working with leadership teams is they're all very good at what I will consider planning, strategic planning. They sit down, they have annual events, quarterly events, all geared around putting together goals, plans, ambitions, whatever it is that you want to call it. But they're awful at execution. And this is the challenge. So if you think about people like Steve Jobs, like this is a larger than life individual, creative, just unbelievable. You couldn't replicate another Steve Jobs, right? Unique individual. Okay. Well, Tim Cook, who took over for him after he passed away, is an equally amazing individual. I mean, he's just amazing in a different way. He is an amazing managerial, operational person. He's like a Swiss watch. I mean, he absolutely does an incredible job at managing Apple. Okay. Leading Apple, I should say, not really managing because you don't manage people, you lead people. And same thing with leadership teams. But the question I would throw out there is, has Apple come up with anything revolutionary since Steve Jobs is gone? I venture to say probably not. And I think this is the key between entrepreneurial organizations and bureaucratic, established larger organizations. And the transition from one to the other is very difficult because you have individuals in an entrepreneurial organization that have great skills and ideas and passions and goals and whatever else they want to put out there for the organization, but then somehow they don't execute and they don't execute effectively. So for me, it all comes down to what I call strategic execution. And there's a process for that. I developed something called BOSS. It's a framework for how organizations can implement this internally, and it stands for Balanced Operating Systems and Solutions. And in working with successful entrepreneurs, all of these friction points kept coming up in how they're leading their organization and how they're being effective or not in their role. And so I needed to figure out a way to organize all of these activities. And that is actually what ended up transpiring is we created this platform using BOSS framework. And so leadership teams, if they have the right personal attributes, they are what I call dangerous individuals, and they're committed to the mission of the organization. They can be exceptional at strategic execution, but if they implement a framework around it, and that's what's, in my view, the missing piece for a lot.
What's the number one reason why they're poor at execution? Is it because what I've seen in my experience is you might be some that they don't have the skills to execute the plans. Otherwise, they don't circle back and figure out, is this still the right vector? It's not communicated well to the teams, and you get this big mismatch between what the grand vision was and what people are actually doing without the checks and balances along the way to say like, no, this team down here building this one small piece of the answer that has to map into the bigger picture. And if it doesn't, the whole thing tumbles. What's your biggest reason why the teams don't execute?
I think there are two. One is, I alluded to it earlier, which is the management versus leadership. Oftentimes, they don't have a very good set of metrics of how to evaluate progress. And the metrics or KPIs or whatever you want to call them that they're using are really not that valuable. And so they're measuring activity that doesn't lead to the outcomes that they're looking for. And so they get caught up in the management of these metrics, and they end up feeling like a manager and not a leader to the people that are in their organization. That is not going to bode well if you're trying to grow and scale an organization. Primarily because if you're going to grow and scale the way that most organizations have to grow and scale, if they're going to get to a larger company, it's not about linear growth. It's about exponential growth. You can't do it on linear growth. Linear growth will just lead to more mediocrity. Think of it as there's a floor and there's a ceiling, right? The ceiling is that exponential growth that you're seeking. So the floor would be incremental growth. But if all of the activities you're trying to accomplish are at that incremental level, that becomes your ceiling. So what's the floor? The floor becomes mediocrity. It doesn't doesn't bode well for the organization growing. So one is this concept that they need to be focused on true leadership in their roles with the appropriate metrics that are moving the needle and are driving this exponential growth. That is super critical, I think. The other thing that's really important is they have to have a framework. And that's where BOSS framework came into play because it's not about managing tasks, right? Most of these individuals are pretty capable at, if they've gotten to a leadership role, they're capable at managing projects and tasks. But those are tactical functions. Those are not strategic functions. And if you're on a strategic path, I'll give you a technology analysis because that is the field that you came from, right? If you've got a technology product that you're trying to build and you've got multiple teams that are building different components of that project, they've been given a mandate of what to work on. And so they're on this path and they're not going to pivot. They're going to keep pushing forward until they accomplish that path, right? So you have multiple teams potentially that are all going in the same direction, and ultimately a product has to develop out of it. Nobody's asking the question as you go along, does this product even matter anymore? What has changed? Think of in the middle of COVID, right? Maybe the product that you were developing is no longer valuable the way it was 6 months prior, okay? And if the leadership team is so focused on the goal objective and not in understanding how to make pivots as they go, nothing happens. Okay, even if they're using an agile process for this. So, what BOSS Framework allows them to do is have a series of what we'll call initiatives that are valuable to the organization, and they're built in such a way that there is always a pivot. There's a backup plan. A lot of this was built around military concepts and frameworks, which I don't want to divert the conversation there, but you have to have a backup plan. You have to come into the process understanding that what you're building may be the wrong thing and you shouldn't be building it, or maybe the way you're managing the project is not the right way. So there's lots of fine details to go into, but the fact of the matter is if you don't have a very solid framework of how to manage these initiatives and projects, the likelihood they're not going to happen. And the facts are very clear. If you look at business transformation projects and technology projects, for that matter, digital transformation projects, the studies all show the same thing. Well over 70 to 75% of these projects don't ever come to fruition and successfully.
Hi, everybody. Dr. Matt here. In the exciting conclusion of my conversation with Boris Blum, we shift from how leaders execute to how professionals build financial independence and why the typical 401k playbook may be riskier than people realize. You won't want to miss it, and it's available now. I will see you there.